to attack dissident and activists, but also to manipulate information through state-led disinformation and trolling. And really, it's the people who are the receiving end of the trolling by the government and state-led disinformation. It's really activists, vulnerable groups, women human rights defenders. So if you look at the case of Thailand alone, we saw the growth of a cyber army in October 2020. We knew that there were already ISOC, so the intelligence section of the military in Thailand, that was already trolling women human rights defenders and activists. But in October 2020, the government decided to create what we call a cyber army that is directly under the Royal Thai Army, and that is focusing on information operations, so what we call IOs. And it's a military-backed information manipulation. Back in 2020 and back in 2021, so when Twitter had quite a decent Twitter policy team, they were able to take down over 900 accounts linked to the Royal Thai Army. And in March 2021, Facebook was able to remove 185 accounts that was also linked to the military and that were involving information operations accounts as well. And but with the rise of digital literacy, I would say also within social media platform, especially Twitter, we are not seeing such supports from tech companies anymore. And there has been a rise of cyber attacks against Thai human rights organizations. And there has been an average of 2,388 attacks as per 2023 alone. So now I would like to share with you some specific case studies of trolling, especially against women human rights defender. So there are prominent women human rights defender in Thailand, Kunankana Nilapajit, who used to be a human rights commissioner at the National Human Rights Commission of Thailand, and who is now also a UN expert within the UN Working Group on Enforced Disappearance. And Shana Hemina, who is a prominent women human rights defender from the south. And they are both working on Thailand's southern parts in Pattani, supporting human rights defenders and women human rights defenders there. And because they are women in a very restrictive patriarchal setting, and because they are denouncing also torture perpetrated by the military, they have been subjected to a state-led disinformation campaign orchestrated by ISOC, so Thailand military, via information operations account. They have been spreading false information against them, calling them names, undermining their vital work, trying to influence the population in the southern part of Thailand to basically go against those two prominent women human rights defenders. The two women human rights defenders decided to fight back against the Thai military. And in May 2022, they decided to sue the Prime Minister office. However, in February of this year, the case was dismissed by the Bangkok Civil Court, stating that there was insufficient evidence of trolling by the government. And so for us, it raises accountability and human rights defenders' concern. It raises a lack of accountability from the government, but also from social media platform who could have assisted in providing and also in testifying that they were effectively state-led disinformation campaign against the two women human rights defenders.
Emilie, can you wrap up like in 1 minute? Thank you.
Yeah. In Laos myself, sometimes I'm victim of state-led disinformation when regarding our work. So during COVID, I was accused of bringing Lao youth to Thailand and sending them back to Laos with COVID and paying them 3,000 to 5,000 Thai baht to cross the border and then bringing back COVID into the country. So what we really want from tech companies, it's really for tech companies to be able to work with us. But we know that the trusted flaggers system is not working. And I think my colleagues are going to elaborate further on that. We know that those trusted flaggers are not working, that even if you're part of the group and you flag content, it's not necessarily taken into consideration. And we always receive answers such as, it's going to be very difficult for Meta to prove that any links or any content that we are sending to them are actually violating the community standards. And even if they are violating community standards, tech companies themselves are being restricted by the domestic legal framework of the country they are operating. And so I have put here some recommendations to governments and tech companies for them to be able to uphold digital rights. So obviously for governments, it's to amend any cyber laws that are being weaponized against human rights defenders, but also protect the safety of human rights defenders, ensuring intersectionality and genderless in their policies, and stop judicial harassment. And for tech companies, it's really to adhere to the UNGPs, to be able to work with us and embrace the GNI principles concerning freedom of expression, and develop precise guidelines in terms of services that define prohibited speech, but really being able to work with us, because as much as we are trying to build an alliance and work with tech companies from Thailand and Laos, we have the impression that tech companies are working more closely with governments, authoritarian governments, and responding to authoritarian governments' requests more than hearing and seeing us when we are talking to them about the need to effectively moderate content in support of human rights defenders and not against. Thank you.
Thank you, Emilie. So we hear from what happened in Thailand and Laos. I will continue by inviting Oliver Spencer, consultant for the Free Expression Myanmar. Are you here, Oliver?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, please continue to share with us what is the situation on content moderation in Myanmar, and also what are some initiatives that you did in Myanmar. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, thanks for inviting me, and a very early morning here in Chiang Mai in Thailand. So I'll just explain a little bit about the different dynamics at work in the experiences in Myanmar in regards to social media content moderation. What we found over the past few years is that there are multiple rights that are being exercised online that we come across problems with. Most of the platforms, with the exception of one or two, are overwhelmingly focused on enforcing limitations of rights rather than enabling them. And this is mainly due, the core reason for this is around the sort of algorithmic advertising that's based on prioritizing more time on the platform rather than encouraging better content. And unfortunately, because of obviously this priority of more time, it kind of encourages increased conflict, gossip, things about sex, etc. And that means that the platforms find themselves constantly sort of fighting to delete this kind of content. What we've come across in particular is three sort of areas where there is particular issues. The first is about how the platforms sort of algorithmically curate in a way that undermines international human rights standards. A really good example of this was Meta's global rollout of its current affairs deprioritization policy. They call it something different, but I'm obviously explaining it from our point of view. So what Meta did is that because of the problem of the American political polarization, they decided to deprioritize current affairs content on the Facebook platform. And in countries like Myanmar, where Facebook is basically the primary, if in some cases the only source of public affairs information, if you deprioritize current affairs information, you have a significant impact on the information ecosystem of the country. So what happened is that they deprioritized what they regard as current affairs, which comes from, for example, news media outlets, and then and that was left in favor of basically disinformation and misinformation that was created by non-reliable sources. At the time, there was a big warning that went to Facebook that this is the likely impact in the Myanmar ecosystem. And just this month, we found out from multiple media outlets that were meeting up to discuss that it has had a huge impact on their audiences. So we can see here how the algorithmic curation has a drastic impact at the local level. And that's basically also policy related to the global space, which is principally directed at North America and possibly Europe, and the impact that it has on the global South. The second area is that about platforms under moderating. So the best example in the Myanmar context is Telegram. So Telegram's, as you all know, has almost no moderation whatsoever. What you can see from this in regards to at the national level is that there's a massive amount of what would be potentially unlawful content that spreads in the information ecosystem. So what we see in Myanmar is a massive amount of trolling, impersonation, doxing. We've got things like slut shaming, image-based sexual violence, and so forth. And then it also includes under moderation of content that is, that there is no debate about, that is entirely, completely unlawful in almost every jurisdiction, if not every jurisdiction in the world. And in the Myanmar context, that's violent threats, it's harassment, intimidation, cyber stalking, and in many cases, direct incitement. So that's incitement to violence, as well as incitement to discrimination. So we can see here that under moderation, not only has it leads to an increase in sort of content that is on the border between lawful and unlawful, but also just purely unlawful content that is spreading due to a lack of moderation. And the third type that we see is over moderation. So this is platforms that over moderate or that cheaply moderate. They do it in a very cheap way to save resources. So what we see is a very broad approach to moderation. And this encapsulates far beyond what international standards would allow moderation to remove. This is partly due to under-resourcing, but also just due to the nature of the kind of content that the platform attracts. Over-moderation in Myanmar is seen in particular in regards to Facebook. What we see is that platforms, basically, they have a sort of pick and choose approach to which international standards that they abide by and which they ignore. A good example of this, while claiming that they're protecting human rights. So they claim they're protecting human rights, but then they ignore certain standards. And a good example of this in regards to over-moderation is Meta's dangerous organizations and individuals policy. So this is a policy that applies very much to conflict areas like Myanmar. And it's obviously, in Meta's explanation, it will be to remove content that they don't want on the website. But their policy says that by default, that they will remove content that is neutral about organizations that they classify as dangerous organizations that are individuals. So by default, they remove anything that's neutral. And obviously, in a country like Myanmar, where there is massive conflict, there is a significant amount of so-called neutral content about these dangerous organizations, because the media coverage obviously is primarily focused on dangerous organizations because they are the belligerents in the conflict. And also the public is very interested in what the, these so-called dangerous organizations and individuals are doing. So by Meta having a default of removing content that is neutral, it includes a vast amount of information that offline would be completely acceptable and is completely protected by international human rights standards. So you can see there just an example of how over moderation in policy and then the impact on the ground in countries that are dealing with these very difficult questions. Obviously, in regards to over moderation, Meta has established the oversight board, and the oversight board has only heard one case in regards to Myanmar, and that was about hate speech, which the oversight board did reject for the same reason that they said that Meta's decision to remove the content did not abide by their own community standards and international human rights standards.
Oliver?
So, yeah.
Can you wrap up?
Yeah, sure. So actually that was my my last sentence. So I will wrap up here, and I mean just to put forward some to follow Emilie and just put forward to some sort of recommendations. I mean the key issue for us in regards to content moderation is the impact of the large focus on advertising and ensuring that the people's eyes remain on the platform, and almost all of the problems that we have in dealing with these companies come from originate from that particular problem, and the company's unwillingness to address that basic conflict between them wanting to keep people for longer on their platforms versus encouraging good quality content. And so, the main focus, for the next few decades is how to reverse that. So we see an improvement or a focus on good quality content and less on content that will drive just public interest in the worst meaning of that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Oliver. I will let everyone know that since we are starting late, the session will end at 10:05 Okay. Now we have Lisa Garcia already joining through the Zoom. Lisa, can you please explain to us the situation of content moderation in Philippines, but also I would ask again about can you share a bit about the Southeast Asia Collaborative Policy Network that becomes the solution between the communication between civil society and tech companies. So the mic is over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Damar. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone who's here with us in this session. So first of all, maybe I'll discuss about the situation in the Philippines based on the work that we do at the Foundation for Media Alternatives. So my organization has been focusing on online gender-based violence. And since 2012, actually, we've been collecting cases of online gender-based violence, specifically based on the reports that we see on media, those that are reported to us by our partner organizations, and those that are reported to us directly by victims themselves through our online platform. And through the years, what we've seen is an increase in reported cases on media, as well as the different trends happening. And actually, during the height of COVID-19 in 2020, we have seen the most number of reported cases of online gender-based violence in the Philippines. I think this is the same for other countries as well, including Indonesia, And perhaps this is also because of the fact that a lot of people shifted to the online space during that time. So the cases that we usually see are those that are related to online sexual exploitation, the abuse of children, non-consensual sharing of intimate images, and a lot of hate speech as well. We have observed many human rights defenders and journalists who have been maligned online. They have experienced getting, especially the women, they would experience getting rape threats, death threats as well for speaking up about certain issues. In the Philippines, there is such a thing as red tagging, or being labeled as a communist or a supporter of communists, or promoting the communist insurgency in the country. And often it is journalists and human rights defenders who are red tagged. And this has put their lives, as well as those of their families also, at risk. And unfortunately, sometimes it is government or a government agency or an official from the government who does the red tagging. The Philippines does not have a law on hate speech, but that doesn't mean that hate speech doesn't happen. It does, and it can, of course, do a lot of harm to individuals. And we have observed this, especially for women. Perhaps I can cite during the 2022 national elections that we had, we have seen how female candidates experienced hate speech online. For instance, Leni Robredo, the lone presidential aspirant among 10 candidates, was a recipient of a lot of hateful messages. She was called a lot of names. She was called stupid and airhead, even a prostitute, something like that. If an alleged intimate video of one of her daughters even surfaced online. Of course, the likes of Robredo, some journalists would have the capacity to engage with platforms, but other people, including local candidates in local posts, may not be as savvy as she is. Of course, Facebook or Meta is still the most popular platform in the country, although there are other popular platforms, YouTube, TikTok, etc. During and after the elections, Meta said that they removed a lot of content containing hate speech because they said that this is like it dehumanizes people, etc. But this was during the elections, and they were really, monitoring well the discussions online. But after the elections, I don't think that they were as gung-ho or as that the monitoring has not been like that. Of course, platforms, when you report to them that there is disinformation, a post that is promoting misinformation, disinformation, it is taken down. But unfortunately, the posts are also shared on other platforms, and it's really difficult to monitor all these things. There is fact checking, of course, but this is mostly done by third-party partners of platforms, and they are limited as well when they do fact checking. And unfortunately, as well, fact checkers also get fact checked by trolls. So, and that puts their reputation also in question when they get fact checked by trolls. Of course, Meta has a country office in the Philippines, and personally, my organization, they know these people in the country office. Thus, for us, if organizations like us who know them, it's easy for us to get in touch with them and report cases. We get invited to their policy briefings, meetings, and consultations, ask them questions, clarify policies, etc. Unfortunately, that is not true for all civil society organizations who are handling different cases, let's say, of gender-based violence, etc. So they don't get the invites to all these events. that is why what we do is to get in touch with these other organizations, and of course we try to help them. I think yeah, it is useful for organizations also to engage with platforms themselves, because they do experience a lot of well, of course, being subject to harassment, perhaps even violence online. It puts their reputation at risk, etc. It is important for them to get to talk to these platforms, to engage with them, so that when they so that they know what to do when they experience abuse, etc. And being a member of an alliance, I think, is something that would help. And this would segue me to the formation of the Southeast Asia Collaborative Policy Network. Of course, this is something that was recently established in May of this year. It is a coalition of several organizations, civil society organizations in Southeast Asia that aim to promote internet freedom through developing the capacity of civil society organizations to engage and have dialogues with ICT companies, whether these are tech companies, ISPs, or telcos, as well as to engage as well and have dialogues with governments and even the ASEAN, since we are in this region. We know that we in the region, we share a lot of issues that are common to us: mass surveillance, disinformation, since it's going to be election time for some countries here, the influence operations happening, online censorship, attacks on human rights defenders, etc. And it is important that we work together as a group, as a network or a coalition, in order to engage targeted actors in order to have our voices in the region heard, and so that policies as well, especially those that pertain to the region, can be worked out and discussed with big tech and other ICT companies.
So thank you, Lisa. So we hear from all the speakers about problems, what happening on ground. We heard about the restrictive regulation, disinformation, IO or influence operation, the unclear people who works on the content moderation from the platform, offer moderating problems, online gender-based violence. We all know this problem happening, but this is something that probably not the same with what happened in the rest of the world, and we need to talk to the tech company to understand that we have to tackle this problem together. So my question now to Professor Park: do you have how to solve how the civil society and tech companies can work together to tackle these problems, and especially how to tackle problems when one of the problems is the censorship from the state? So the floor is yours. I'll give you 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to be really brief. So Damar, you can say a few things as well. So internet was on the side of democracy. So back in 2010-11, there was a movement to nominate internet for Nobel Peace Prize, if you remember. But anti-democratic forces began to learn to use the internet. So the question, came up, like, what to do with this? Do we continue to provide Do you continue to play the passive role of providing the platform for everybody to speak, or do we take more active role of taking the side of democracy? And I think that we need to take the side of democracy in Southeast Asia, where, especially in Southeast Asia, where there is a rise of administrative censorship by the governments that are becoming more and more authoritarian. And in order to do that, we need to be able to not just push back on censorship, but also demand benevolent censorship, demand more takedown of especially those social media trolls, benevolent censorship from the tech companies, not from the government, but from the tech companies, especially against the social media trolls that are often aligned with the government, who are using the trolls to continue their regime to suppress dissident voices. In order to do that, one international legal norm that we can refer to is a Rabat Plan of Action, which asks us to look at these three factors and then run almost 100% harm-based standard. Context, intent of the speaker, and status of the speaker, and the text, that's the content, and reach of the speech, that means how far the speech travels, and also the likelihood and imminence of harm. So in the final analysis, if there is a harm that's being caused by the speech, the tech companies should look into moderating them. Now, one model that I think we need to look at is Twitter's, now it's called X, Twitter's Trust and Safety Council. In terms of process, it was compared to the Trusted Flagger system, Trust and Safety Council had a more stable, lasting membership, where 40 organizations had 70 people altogether, like 110 people periodically met and were given updates on changes in the Twitter's community guidelines. Not just that, they were updated on the experiments that the Twitter was doing on new community guideline, and brought back the result of the experiment to receive feedback from the members of the Trust and Safety Council. On the side, there was a crisis response hotline, and the members were listed publicly and updated regularly so that people could apply, or people could talk to those members to have access to the council. And through this process, so far I talked about procedure. In terms of substance, there were these community guidelines that did not exist in Facebook or YouTube. For instance, the guideline of solving the public conversation. This did not take down the contents, but it suppressed, or it de-amplified the reach of the postings if the account doesn't have a confirmed email address, and if the same person signs up multiple accounts for the postings and accounts that accounts that show behavior indicating coordinated attack. For these postings, they didn't take down; they just de-amplified so that the postings can be viewed only when the viewers take extra step. Hateful conduct policy also was something more affirmative, something more proactive than the community guidelines of Facebook or YouTube. where the protected category was broadened to include the membership in an identifiable group. Now, the members of Trust and Safety Council, including me, pushed back on that. So it did broaden beyond the legal definition of hate speech, but it was withdrawn from the definition, the group definition called all identifiable groups. So a compromise was made in between, and on a harm-based analysis, the protected groups, the groups that are not protected by the usual international law on hate speech, can also be harmed through hate speech. I mean, close to home, the victims of Sewol Ferry in Korea or the Itaewon Stampede, I think this can be also protected groups under the hateful conduct, under this guideline. Political advertising is another, where the contents were not taken down but were also de-amplified. So I'm going to wrap up.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to wrap up. I think the platform should not try to emulate what the government does. The government comes into power through election or coup d'etat or whatever. And they come with the ideology. They come with these promises to the people that they'll create some new world. Now, the platforms can be much more pragmatic. It can maintain their focus on whether harms are created, and deprioritizing certain content, de-amplifying some content. All these moderation activities can be part of the product. So that's what we felt when we went to Trust and Safety Council meeting, that we were actually helping Twitter develop a product, a product which is a platform that was family friendly and that was more supportive of civic discourse. So we want to use CCPN to we want to use CCPN to revive this alliance with the tech to make the platform work for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Park. This is very unlikely. I cannot open question and answer session, but I think we'll close closing this session with anything that we can do now in the Southeast Asia, whether we ask for the platform accountability on transparency, digital literacy, and also responsible platform governance. There are critical components. We have to move forward to a safer and more responsible digital landscape. But I think in the future, all of this can be happen if we harness everything for the benefit of digital age, and also mitigating the risk to our societies and democracies. I'm closing this session, and I hope this all this sharing session and also ideas can be discussed over the coffee break, or we can write to each other, and also all of you coming from the Southeast Asia can connect with the Southeast Asia Collaborative Policy Network. Thank you so much. Thank you.
A reminder that since we didn't have a Q&A for this particular session, go to comment.aprigf.asia. You'll be able to find the paragraph for this session. And if you have questions, you can put it there and we can send it over to the organizers so they can answer your questions. Up next in the same room, starting at 10:10, is unpacking stakeholder engagement with the private sector. Please stay in the room or definitely come back if you want to grab a coffee.
Recording stopped.
So if
Recording in progress.
No, sorry for this morning. You will be the one. I'm channeling God. Okay, perfect. So can we be able to have the yes, we will have it this time. Yeah. You know it. But after that, I mean, generally good.